Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Enterprise Universe with our ongoing conversation with Dr. James Stalker. Today is a special day because we're going to really be focusing in on a topic that I know a lot of our listeners and viewers are probably most interested in, which is climate change and how Dr. Stalker's inventions can actually help us get on the front foot with climate change versus always being on the back foot. It always feels, at least to me, Dr. Stalker, that we're always playing catch up with climate change and we never seem to, we're always surprised by what hits us next. So maybe as a first question, can you tell us a little bit of, with respect to what you're seeing in terms of why countries are starting to worry about climate change? And maybe we just start with the background of like what do you see going on as from when you look at different countries around the world and what they're starting to worry about.
That sounds great, Eamon. Thank you for the introduction. I just want to touch on a couple of things that we did last segment before I
Okay.
jump onto the topic. You know, I did end up saying that my presentation was at Boston University.
Yes.
I really meant to say Boston Convention Center.
Okay.
Just
Sorry.
want to correct myself. And also, when you said I worked at Sandia National Labs, I actually never worked at
Los
Sandia
Alamos.
National
Oh, it's
Labs.
Los
So just
Alamos.
want to make sure it's clear.
Okay. Sorry, that was my mistake.
So
Apologies
for
for
those
that.
sticklers out there, I want to make sure that they understand this. But a couple of things before I get into this. So the big thing that came out from our last conversation is the paradigm shift. Okay, I talked about the paradigm shift a lot, but I want to solidify and encapsulate that idea for the viewer clearly. So what I mean by this paradigm shift. So here is what's going on, Eamon. Up to now, the current science relies on observations. So
Mm-hmm.
think of it as a sandbox, a smaller sandbox, and then within it is a much smaller uh, modeling sandbox. Okay.
Yes.
So this sandbox for observations, and in it there is the modeling smaller sandbox. So that's the state of the art of the science. So I want people to understand where I'm going with it, and I call that observation-centric science. So what I have done with the Stalker method and the implementation into RESPR model is build a much larger sandbox around the observational sandbox I just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
That's about 9 times the sandbox of the observation that just pointed out.
Yes.
So
Right.
there is a smaller modeling box within that observations box too, but that's not the same as the box that I have created, the sandbox.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's why the shift, the paradigm shift, going from observations to model centric approaches that I developed. And that's what Stalker method is all about.
And I think this is very, very, very kind of crucial. And I think you're bringing up this because it's so. And let me just, for the layman, try and ask you a few questions here. So number one is, it's my understanding that science is about, I guess you take an observation, right? And then you have an experiment, right? And that experiment is either going to validate or invalidate some kind of a hypothesis or a model that you have about reality. And it's basically input output, and it's usually a small box, as you say, because it's a constrained little universe, so that you can get like input output, and it's kind of like, yes, my hypothesis is true or my hypothesis is false, and that confirms or not confirms my model of reality. Is that a true statement? Is that at a very simplistic way what you're talking about as the small box
That is true for the smaller box.
or the
When I say
smaller box?
smaller
Yes.
box,
Yes.
the number of observations available to us, which is about 10%, that's not represented for the remaining 90% data gap. There is only one way to go there, not by the current models. by the way. Current models are only going to improve within the smaller observational sandbox, but the bigger modeling box that I have created, which is really the paradigm shift, it's really accounting for the 90% gap that's not available, and
Right.
that's really the shift that we're talking about.
Right. So what you're saying then is that it's not, for something as complex as the weather, we can't go off of a small subset of observations in order to predict or to use it to model our reality. We first need to create a bigger data set. Is that what you're essentially telling the audience right now? And that's the paradigm shift. It's from using small data sets to drive science to using large data sets to drive science.
It is. So here is what's happening with the current state of the art. You have a smaller observational box, and there is another small box, modeling box inside that. So we're trying to fill the data gaps that are 90% not covered by the observations through this smaller modeling capability, which is really essentially taking the value the observation sandbox creates and smearing it. As a matter of fact, it's not even using how much is available in the observation sandbox itself. So they are smearing it. And that's why the Stalker method-based modeling approach actually creates value from the small sandbox representing the observations to this large sandbox.
So, and as we said, you're extrapolating a small set of observations to create another set of observations versus taking the observations you have to create a larger set of observations that can then be used to drive a model that can process the larger data set to tell you about what's going to happen in the future. Is that true?
It's not only for the future, Eamon, but also for the past and current conditions.
And the present, yes.
It applies to the same thing. So when you're creating using the current science and the methods, you're extrapolating the small amount of information to this large spatial domain, not only in space but in time when you do the forecasting also. But that interpolation itself from the small data sets without accounting for the underlying physical processes, that's really the critical deficiency in the science. And that's what the Stalker method is about.
And it's almost, as if I was to say, it's almost like you've got to as you move through time, you've got to have as complete a picture of that unit of time as you can. And we have this tiny little view into reality, and we're trying to make these big speculative leaps when you're saying, no, stop, fill in your data gaps, and then move that through whether it's the past or the future, build out that so you understand exactly what's happening.
That's fairly good for future forecasting. And that's something that you can only do through the modeling. Of course, the modeling that's used currently does it in a scientifically invalid manner, but the method that I have developed actually goes through the underlying physical process representation and then builds these forecasts into the future.
Which is your second point, which is bigger data and bigger models. It's not just small data, small models, big data, big models that represent real physics, big data that can be derived from what we know from a small data set to a 90%, and then big physics, if you will, versus smearing, if you will, and small physics in a small box, and then you've probably got a ton of assumptions then in the small box. I assume the small box just loaded with all sorts of assumptions.
That is true, and I also want to point out that the community actually taken up the word big data, the term already.
Yes.
Even with the small amount of data and the models and the deficiencies that I point out, they've already used the buzz term like big data. But you know what they're referring to when they say that?
No.
It's big data compared to 20 years ago.
Yes, right, sure.
Yes, we have more data now compared to 20 years ago, but it's still not the same in terms of what's theoretically required,
Right.
leaving that large data gap. So they have tried to use the message to say
Right.
we are getting a lot of data, and they would be right, relatively speaking, but not absolutely when you put it into the context of how much is needed. So
But
unfortunately, your big data thing is not going to work because we are bigger data or more like data squared. That's really where we're looking at because it's enhancing that data quality and quantity so much.
and Dr. Stalker, you have been able to merge many physical processes into a unified model. I think that's another problem people have is that, you know, getting so many physical processes to operate within your model is a huge challenge. And I think that's probably why this, as I say, this Renaissance man thing of you've got to know fluid dynamics, you got to know, the aspects of physical Newtonian stuff. You've got to know, the how the water vapor and the gases behave. Like this is pretty complicated, bringing together, many disciplines, mathematics, computers. This is what I find so remarkable myself is the multidisciplinary, the degree of mastery you have to have of so many disciplines to pull this off. I think it's just mind bending to me.
I think it's absolutely true. You need to have that mastery in a lot of these areas. And I was pointing out, I've known a lot of colleagues who are good in understanding the physical basis for the models, but they're not good at coding, and
Right.
vice versa. So you really need to have that elevated understanding,
Right.
expertise in multiple areas to be able to do this. And as you would know, anybody who knows how to code and run the models, they could produce some data. That's
Absolutely.
really not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is, are you able to question what you're doing and then find the solutions and the answers? The answer is no, that's not true. But you know what I have found over the years, Eamon?
Right.
They are good at questioning my methods.
Haha.
They have done that, and of course, I always have answers, so it's not a big deal for me when they question what I'm doing. But I would pose back another question to them and saying, this curiosity you have, or this type of questioning ability you have, why haven't you used that in the current methods? Why are you
Because they're
accepting the current methods?
orthodoxy, probably they're the orthodoxy. I have a similar challenge in insofar as um, why I think we really are in an age where we have to question the assumptions and get back to solid ground, things that we can all agree in. So I think questioning is good. The problem is we need to question the foundational aspects, not and that is the challenging part, because I think there's naturally a resistance to questioning foundational knowledge. Now, at the same time, it's absolutely necessary, because the way in which we're proceeding, we need a more broader, better, because it's even, as you say, like whether talking about conspiracy theories, I'm a big fan, and I think you are too, Dr. Stalker, of, hey, everything's open, everything's up for debate, here are the facts. But the thing is, there can't be any holy grails, there can't be any, poking at me. You've got to be willing to speak to your fundamental beliefs and assumptions as well. And that's true science, is to basically put all your cards on the table, because God knows, we should really be humble and be willing to see that if the truth is the truth, and at least in the scientific context, and our ideas are just ideas. And we should be always, our fealty is to reality, not to.
I agree. I agree, Emin. And you know what? That's exactly where I started. I started questioning the current science. And because that's what I do, actually. Even if I tried not to, I wouldn't know what to do because I'm attracted and driven to the holes in the science or any topic, as a matter of fact. So that's really what I try to do. And I'm trying to utilize my expertise in that area.
Right. And I think this gets down to this fundamental idea that 90% of decisions are based on opinions, not based on data, you know. And I think even though we live in an information rich world, I don't feel like there's been a lot of, I feel like there's still a big gap at a political and a societal level where we don't really have an accurate model of reality, whether it's, and when I say whether that's a shared model or a physical model in a computer, and therefore we're fragmenting because we've got these competing models of reality. When they're just models of reality, we should try and get to something more, you know, physically based, something more we can all agree on the fundamentals, and then maybe we could start trusting the model a bit more. It's a bit like, I feel like we've got a real, if we don't get there, we've got a real problem, because I don't feel that decisions are being made. They're more opinion based than fact based. And maybe this is off topic, but I think it is related.
You're absolutely right there, Eamon, and I go a step further. You know, I don't mind common folk doing that, but analytical folks like in the sciences, I do hold them at a much higher standard. So right. I want them to discard opinions and start really digging in and try to understand more. And, as I said, when they question my method, which I welcome, because questioning is really everything in the world, as I pointed out, because confusion rules until questioning becomes the center of...
Which is a superpower. And one of your superpowers, Dr. Stalker, is your ability to get to the key questions.
I appreciate that, Eamon. And I know it's not easy. Sometimes I take it for granted. But the amount of hard work that went into in what I do really tremendous, actually. If I were to say that myself, because with my abilities, I probably shouldn't work hard, but I do, because there are so many things to do to make it all work. So I appreciate your comment there, but I do hold my fellow scientists to a higher standard than some of the politicians or the regular people. They may not have the ability to question things and put things together and logically fit it, but scientists are supposed to be doing that and discard all of the opinions. But that just does happen in the scientific world also, unfortunately.
Yes. So now we're in a situation where we're really turning to countries and we're saying, you really need to have a model. And if you're going to get a handle on this climate change thing, you really have to have the best model that you can. And I wanted to really get back to what the kind of the original conversation, if we could, Dr. Stalker, and talk a little bit about, okay, what do they need to get their hands around? Like this climate change thing, why do they need a model now? And what value is that model going to give me in a country specific scenario, in the specific context of a climate change reality that we now live in? So I just want to make sure that, let's just take, for example, that we're making the assumption that climate change is a concern for countries and that it's a driver of behavior. Okay, so let's put that as an assumption. Why do they need a model, and how will that address their concerns? The first is, I've got concerns about climate change. Now you're saying you need this RESPR model and the Stalker method. And now the thing is, I'm asking why? What's the connection between your model and the problem they're very worried about, which is climate change?
Okay, so it's a great question. I think we alluded to some of this over the past few segments. So in the climate change arena, Eamon, there are only three possibilities. Climate is warming, it's staying the same, or it's cooling.
Right.
If you summarize it, that's really it. But the current science, the current models, current observations, current approaches will not be able to either quantify them or recognize them. If it's neutral, it would not be able to recognize. If it's warming, it would not be able to quantify it. If it's cooling, it's not going to be able to quantify that too. You know what that means, Eamon?
We don't know the.
You know what that means? It means if you're taking any measures to mitigate it, okay? So you don't understand how to quantify them first, but you're trying to mitigate it. And you don't know what the mitigation is going to do, what the unintended consequences would be for those measures. You're not going to be able to quantify that also. So that's one of the reasons why you need a robust model that is going to be able to quantify what the scenarios are and how much they are changing over time. You're muted, Eamon.
I'm sorry, Dr. Stalker, yes. Okay. So that's really important then, is to make sure that we have that understanding of the fact that they cannot quantify the change. Is that a correct statement?
Correctly. So let me say this, using the current methods, if they said global warming is occurring and it's by 2 degrees or 5 degrees, okay, let's just say that that's what the current science and the observations and models are saying. But it is incorrect because the amount of information that went into is so small, as I already pointed out, and I actually am writing another paper on that. So it will show you what type of percentage we're talking about. So what happens is you incorrectly quantified this and saying that, okay, climate change is occurring, it's warming. Now let's take some measures to mitigate it. So incorrect assumption, incorrect quantification, and some measures to overcome that. What happens then? You don't even know what those measures are going to do to the system. That's really the reason why I'm saying why it's so critical to understand quantitatively what those 3 scenarios are, first of all. And if you're not able to quantify them, don't worry about the mitigation part, because you're never going to be able to solve and mitigate and actually take advantage of without the full understanding of it. So that's really the value proposition for the Stalker method and the RESPR technology.
So, but how can you get a handle on, like Dr. Stalker, if you don't do this at a global scale, given the interconnectedness of how can you do this only at a country scale? Wouldn't you have to do it at a global scale?
It has to be done on a global scale. That's absolutely true. And that's one of the reasons why when people get my maps, they're also pitching in toward the global maps. So it's not all for their country, and they're not doing it just out of goodness. They're actually doing it because their countries are going to be affected by what's happening over the oceans.
So therefore, as more people join, all of the maps will become more accurate, because we'll be able to, rather than having a very coarse-grained view of the globe and then having specifics in a certain country, we'll start to have specifics everywhere. Is that true? Is that
some minor correction there. When I do a map for, say, Ireland, they're still going to get the fine-grained data for them, okay? And also I'm including some of the oceans around Ireland. It's not like I'm only modeling over Ireland. That's not going to happen. I'm going to increase the domain to a certain extent, so it's influencing your solution also. So you are already paying for that as the chief of this division, okay? But if everybody does the same thing, all of the countries are going to be able to chip in directly or indirectly for me to be able to do the whole thing over the oceans also.
Makes perfect sense. And so therefore, as we grow this, then there will be fine. So I guess if you're the first man in, you will get the opportunity. The main thing is you're getting ahead of everybody by understanding what's happening more specifically, but you will essentially continue to run the models simultaneously and share the data between the models. Is that a correct statement? Or is it one huge model and you're just running a partial piece for Ireland and another partial piece for, or are they I imagine they're parallel models that share data. Is that a correct statement?
At the boundaries, Eamon, when you have country boundaries, there is that data that going over each country there, just like I go over the oceans around your countries. But it's not going to be affected if you don't share the data, if we don't do the country maps for all of the countries. That would be the ideal way to do it, but I could do also in a piecemeal manner, right, one country at a time, which is not the ideal way to do it, but mobilizing the amount of funding needed and the effort, that perhaps that's not going to be practical in the foreseeable future.
But it will be practical once we get some momentum, though, because it might end up being that the early runners, if it's continental scale, will be able to see the benefits and then be able to get other people on board, so that the fidelity and the accuracy increases over time. Would that be a fair statement?
It's a fair statement. I have no doubt in my mind, Eamon. Once we have half a dozen or so countries, especially the major ones, centering each and every continent, that's all we need. Everyone else is going to follow suit, simply because of the fact that the accuracy and the robustness is going to be so huge, yeah, because the science is there. I'm actually,
right. And that's why I think the early adopters are going to basically have a huge advantage over people who lag behind, because number one, they'll be getting the benefit earlier, and we have to talk about a benefit in a little bit. But as well as that, they'll have an opportunity to bring in other countries and drive the global climate response, because they just have better information, they have better understanding, and they'll then become leaders. And I think this is a kind of an important point. I think global leadership now is about helping us as humanity get out of this mess. I don't think global leadership is having the biggest aircraft carrier anymore. So I think this could be a real geopolitically important thing to be if you want to be a leader, a national global leader. This is a very important aspect of the global challenge for the next 50 years. And whoever gets on board early will have the opportunity to be in the front seat of being a leader.
That's absolutely true, Eamon. And here is what it is. If you got the maps for Ireland, the first thing you would do is quantify your resources and use them for your various benefits, renewable energy, water, and conservation, and you name it, droughts and flooding and all of that. So you are able to use that right away to start with. As all of the other countries are getting the same maps, you're also participating in this global leadership, as you talked about, because that's really going to end up being the major problem in the climate scenario, where if you're not able to quantify, you will not be able to take any measures that are meaningful, because you will not be able to deliver on the results.
And really, we're talking about basic uncertainty here. The point you're making is that there's no certainty because we don't have the models. With your models, we can get much closer, we can make better decisions, and we can lead towards solutions. And you can optimize in the short term around just making the most of what you've got, which I tend to think doesn't happen as much as it possibly could, and i.e. on a national basis, making the most of your resources for the good of your people within your country, which I think is often forgotten. I think there's so much kind of money left on the table at a national level by just not using what we've got more, as resources, and therefore making the people of the countries happier, which I think is the goal of the government, and give them health and safety. But really, I'm very excited about this idea of leading in the new world, leading, because it feels like we've got a real vacuum right now, and I feel countries need something that can help them lead. And this seems to be, if we could get there, with one or two key early adopters, I really think this would take off pretty quickly, frankly.
I believe so, and you're right about that. I mean, I'm talking about using the maps and the models for your own country, which is really not selfish. I always say that, when you're trying to live a life and better yourself, philosophically speaking, there's nothing wrong with it. But as you pointed out, the second aspect of it is you become participant in this global problem or global challenge that we're trying to solve. So far, Eamon, with all of the science and the deficiencies we're talking about, that's only talk. They're not going to be able to solve it because the solutions are really rudimentary, crude, and they will never get to the right solutions.
And they're not science-based. Let's be honest. They're based on best statistics, and that's my number one worry for, and one of the main reasons, Dr. Stalker, I personally am doing working with you, is because I really feel there's an important message of hope here, which is that the science is there. We can create models. We can do something about this. We can make rational decisions, but only if we have good information. And we have to get to the next phase, which is creating the good information so we can act on it. And that's why I think it's very hopeful, but I also think it's kind of scary that the global planetary civilization is essentially driving down the road without a model of reality, and they don't know what's going to hit them next.
That's absolutely true. And I don't think my colleagues have done this intentionally. They are trying to do the best they can under what the science is allowing them to do. So I don't want to be too harsh on my colleagues. They're obviously doing the best they can.
But it is a paradigm shift, though, Dr. Stalker, to say we're moving to the age of big physics models, like to help us manage the planet. Like that is like this as like when you think about it as a kind of, one of the things in science fiction is they talk about Kardashev civilizations, which are civilizations that have various levels, and then the big a level 4, I believe it is, they capture all of the energy from the sun. They never talk about the fact that to get from 0 to 1, if we don't get a physics-based model of reality to guide our civilization, we are frankly doomed. Like it's almost like a precondition for our civilization to move to the next level is to create a physics-based model of our climate and our living planet. If we don't do that, I don't see how we can move to the next level of civilization, because civilization that's unguided, that doesn't have that, is too, it's too disruptive. It's killing the host. You have to continue growth. You have to have guidance, and it has to be based on our best physics and our best science. And if we don't get there, I'm not sure we're going to survive, to be honest, Dr. Stalker. In the next 100 years.
I think we touched on this over the last many weeks, Eamon. Science could help sustain the growth meaningfully without having for us to go back in civilization. But you need to have a solid science that could really help you.
Absolutely.
And you can quantify.
Going back in civilization means war to me, Dr. Stalker. People will fight each other. So going back isn't an option unless we want war. And, I honestly believe what you're suggesting is literally the only approach that I feel has a meaningful chance of success. Unless we have a global model that can basically, we can use to understand where we are, how to get the most out of what we have, and to basically grow in a way that's sustainable at a global macro level, while still allowing people to be free, while still allowing people to have markets, while still allowing people, but doing it in the context of the bigger picture. The blind market, the blind centralized planning. It doesn't matter whether it's communist or capitalist. It's going to kill us because it's blind. And
Well, your concern, Eamon, is totally founded. It's got the basis, and I do appreciate your urgency, as I always say, and having good science and the technology based on that science. But don't forget the
no,
humanity
of course,
aspects of it too. That's something that I pay so much attention to. You
yes,
could
yes.
have high power technology solutions, but you have goofy people. I don't mean to put them
Yeah.
down, but you really have to get over that. It's really
So,
not about being selfish. You really have to grow bigger than yourself to be able to see the entire planet
and
and
I,
put
and
all
I,
the solutions together.
and I know, Dr. Stalker, you're talking to several countries already. You've got some really big projects in the pipeline. Like, what is our like? So, what are they like when you like? I think they're starting to see the big picture. I can become a leader in climate change. I can get the most out of my current environment. I can predict the future. I can make better infrastructure investments. This will be a help in taking my civilization. Because if you look at even a country like China or India or Europe or the US or Africa, they're almost like civilizations themselves. They're so big, Russia and Eurasia and stuff. So like you got these multiple civilizations within the global community. You're saying to those, I can help you get to the next level, Mr. Civilization. How is where do they start? What's the where what do they do next? What are your clients? Are you talking about working with their universities? Like how are you like with some of your big customers, how are you even talking about moving forward?
I think this is a good point where I should answer more directly what you asked
Mhm,
the last few times, Eamon. Why did it take so long, right?
mhm,
So here is one of the reasons. One of the reasons was I was trying to get to smaller clients, renewable energy
mhm,
or weather options trading or this and
mhm.
that on a much smaller scale. But that didn't seem like it wasn't going to solve the overall problem that the world is facing.
No, yes.
So that's when I really expanded my
Pivoted.
efforts into climate change and quantifying it. Now I'm trying to also figure out how all of these countries are going to work together without having to fight over, what resources they're going to use and who is going to do what. It's really about everyone doing it together. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So we
Right.
need to figure out how to make that happen. So I'll answer this question too. I mean, ideally, in an ideal world, they hear our message and they come to us because we're only one entity, but there are 200 plus countries and territories in the world. If they come to us, it makes it easy for us to actually put the solutions together. But that's not the only thing we're doing. We're also reaching out to them proactively, and that's how we made contacts with certain countries right now. But it would be a mixed bag where we're going to them, but they're coming to us also. So once we reach a critical mass, that's really where things are going to start happening.
And I know a lot of people use the moonshot kind of concept, but like Werner von Braun essentially knew how to get to the moon in 1945. It just took him another 25 years to get there because essentially the moon rockets were he had solved the fundamental issues with his V2 rocket, I believe, more or less, the basics of it. And I feel that you're the same. You've done the V2 rocket, but we need to get to the moon now, you know? And I know maybe the V2 rockets are bad because I was a weapon of destruction, and I apologize to any viewers that might be offended by that. But the point being that the capability is there, but we've got to scale it up and we've got to apply it to the mission. And the mission is nothing less than global survival, something much way more important than flying a couple of lads to the moon.
That's absolutely true. As a matter of fact, I used to say colonizing other planets is really not going to solve our
Right.
problem because we're going to take the same people.
Yeah.
Just a matter of time before they replicate or duplicate or do the same thing over there. It's just a
Right.
matter of time. So we need to really take care of our people. When I say our people, I'm not talking about any country or any civilization.
Other
It's
sentient beings.
humanity
Yeah.
as a whole. We need to get over what we're trying to do right now and then solve this problem together. I have the technology, I have the expertise, and I have the desire to train other people to get involved in it. And that's one of the reasons why I want to start Stalker Research Institutes across the world. Depending on the size of the country, they may get 1 to 10, research institutes in their countries.
So one of the things I think it's getting on a little bit here. So maybe tonight we'll wrap it up in a few minutes. But I wanted to ask you a few questions about things that I think viewers like and audience people like myself might be interested in talking about. So I feel like there's a lot more to talk about in terms of the climate change agenda, right? We've talked today about regrounding everybody on why this is a paradigm shift, why this is really different. This is not just another NOAA thing or another widget in a box. This is a fundamental scientific change in how we go about doing science and how we go about applying science to real world problems. So we've talked about that in terms of the small box, the large box, the big data sets, the big physics, the combining of multiple physical models into a single model. So we talked about all of that being fundamental. So this is something different, folks. This is not your, weather forecast, typical weather forecast model. We've talked about the fact that you've applied this technology specifically to the smaller scale, but you've recognized that there's a bigger problem out there. It's called climate change, and we really need to up the ante here and provide solutions at a more global level. Hence, your analysis of the human condition, because the human condition is so key to the situation. If we don't understand the human component of our problem, there's no getting to it's not a technical fix, it's a human and a technical fix. It's the two, and it's about enabling, not going backwards, it's about going forwards and like playing into what people need as human beings, but also protecting our environment so that we don't end up killing ourselves and our dogs and cats. So all of that makes perfect sense. One of the things, and now we're saying, okay, you're already talking to certain countries. There's other countries that may join the club and global leadership, and we've talked about all of that. And the fact that it's a paradigm shift in terms of probably all advanced civilizations need a physics-based model of their planet at a very granular level in order to just, be the best services they can to their people, but also to protect both their people and their future, and not inadvertently destroy the place, because I think that's a lot of what's going on. It's inadvertent craziness. So all of that, let's put that all makes perfect sense to me. I'm excited about it. It makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of questions, though, out there at the next level, like, what should we be doing, Dr. Stalker? Should we be like seeding? You've talked about it. Should we be seeding clouds to get more rainfall? Should we be, trying to create clouds? Should we be putting mirrors up? Should we be, growing more, creating sinks? Could we talk in our next session about how RESPR would fit with those types of ideas, like not just in order to optimize what we've had, but how would RESPR be worked? How would RESPR help us figure out what the best thing to do would be to mitigate the change, to mitigate any negative changes that might be occurring?
That's a loaded question. I appreciate that. So here is how I unpack that.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
Sorry,
so let's take Ireland as an example, and we'll expand it out to the globe. So when I give you the maps and the model, the dynamics, and all of that, the expertise, so I give you a list of things to do recommended for your country. 100 things, let's say 100. Of the 100, you would come back and say, Dr. Stalker, I need to prioritize these 10. I will get to the remaining 90, but I need to really work on these 9 or 10 of the 100. Then I would go into the application layer and figure out all of the solutions needed
Okay.
for those 10 items.
So
while
it's not
working
as
on the
simple.
remaining.
It's not as like, yeah. And I think one of the questions that people are going to say is, how do I mitigate kind of my obligation for it? Like, here's one question I want to answer if I was the PM. How do I fulfill my obligations to the Paris Agreement at lowest cost and at highest effectiveness? You know?
You know, the concept behind it is great. I actually like it, but implementation of that is really a real challenge to the current
Yes.
science and the methods. So if somebody says Ireland should have,
Reduce its carbon footprint by 50% by
yeah,
2030.
and go use 20 gigawatts or 30, 50 gigawatts, but in the end, if after you have done that installation, it still hasn't done anything,
I'm doomed. Yeah,
then that's
we don't have
exactly
time. We
where
don't have time to make mistakes. We got to do
that's
the right thing.
exactly where the RESPR technology is going to help you to see how much do you really need to meet those obligations, and perhaps not investing as much too. I will be able to do that. So that's really the reason why I'm saying it's not about just estimating something, but knowing what happens within the
No,
system throughout, not only within your country, but globally. That's exactly what we have to do.
right, right. Great. Well, I think we're about at our we're almost at our stopping time, Dr. Stoker. Um, I don't feel like we've plumbed the depths yet of this climate change discussion. Um, Perhaps we can pick it up in our next. Is there anything in particular you'd like to speak about at the next session, or can we just leave viewers and to anticipate our next discussion about climate change and maybe climate change solutions? Talk a bit more about the application layer. Is that a possibility?
I think that's a great thing to go into, but I will just add a little bit to what we just said, Eamon. So when we actually get to the stage where all of the countries have gotten the maps and they're chipping in to do the entire globe, the scenario planning at that time, meaning we determine what the quantitatively what the climate change is, how that's going, and what mitigating strategies we could put together that would be meaningfully realized using this technology and the solutions that it brings. When we know that, there are lots of different things one can do in terms of scenario planning, whether cloud seeding is needed, if it's needed where, for how long, and if there are negative consequences on
Yes.
the climate change, how would we address those? These questions are not possible right now with the current science and the methods. And
Yeah,
we
and
will really get into that a little bit more.
maybe we can get into that a little bit, and that makes perfect sense to me what you just said, which is that with it really will take communal decision making to resolve these issues, and that in a sense the model becomes a way in which we can make informed communal decisions. It's a type of collective intelligence at that stage, Dr. Stalker, because we're bringing minds, the best scientific minds, we're bringing the best country minds together and using the model to help us make the best. So the model becomes the ultimate decision support system, if you will, for us to make the best decisions we can in this time of challenge that we're in right now.
And it is, and another bigger challenge to Eamon is elevating human behavior. I want to push them from the selfish end of the spectrum toward maybe mutual selfishness I talked about in the middle, but
Yeah.
if they're going toward the selfless end of the spectrum, that's even better. It's really not that hard once you realize the importance of it and for the survival of our world. So
Yeah. No,
that's why.
I'm with you there. We got to get, as I've said, there's the game A and game B theories that are out there. We got to get to game B, but we got to bring the game A guys along. So it'll have to be a bit of both. There'll have to be some carrot and then some. But I'm really excited about the idea of communal sense making, communal decision making, and having a tool to make sense of the world and have people make decisions that are in their own best interest and in the best interest of everybody. And that's the kind of the open data sets should allow us to see into everybody's card decks to some extent, so we can make best decisions for everybody. And I believe those are out there, and we're at the point now where we have to start playing the best decision for everybody versus the best for me. We got to play into the common pot here. Otherwise, there will be no pot for us to share.
I think there are some key leaders, Eamon, that are going to step forward and work with us. I truly believe that it's going to happen.
I'm excited about that. And these are the heroes and the men of action that we need right now at this point in our history, and they will be remembered for millennia for the actions they take today.
And
okay. Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Stalker.
If that didn't happen, Eamon, we would be stuck with the problem, and it's going to get worse perhaps, and then we are not able to solve it at all, but not for lack of resources or lack of effort. That's there. We'll
Right.
throw money at it and spend another decade on it without the right solutions. That's really what I don't want to see happen.
Well, it's timely, and we'll talk again to the viewers. Dr. Stalker's back online. We had a few days off there, and we'll be hitting you again with another video next Tuesday. So God bless, and look forward to seeing you soon, everybody, and take care out there.